license and registration. Now.
I'm grabbing
Don't reach around.
Wallet. I'm grabbing my wallet, just so you know I'm a sheriff's deputy.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Keep talking and you'll be out of the car.
I'm being cooperative. Badge is on my belt.
I said stop. Hold on.
That's what I thought.
Red and blue lights cut through the night like a blade, not on a highway, not after a chase, but on a quiet residential street where a man in uniform was driving home, badge clipped, radio silent, expecting nothing more than sleep. What followed wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a test of authority, of pride, of how quickly the law forgets its own when skin color enters the frame. This wasn't just a traffic stop. It was a collision between identity and power, and it would leave careers fractured on both sides of the badge. Before this story unfolds, take a moment. Subscribe, not for outrage, but for accountability. Because these moments don't live on headlines alone. They live in policy, training rooms, and the quiet choices officers make when no one thinks they're being watched. The street was quiet in the way only residential roads are after midnight, not peaceful, just empty. Porch lights hummed. A single dog barked somewhere behind a fence, then stopped. The deputy's car rolled at exactly 30 miles per hour, cruise control set out of habit more than need. The dashboard clock read 12:17 a.m. He noted it without thinking. Muscle memory. End-of-shift instincts never really turn off. He had already taken off his outer vest. The badge was still clipped to his belt, catching a faint reflection from the streetlights as he drove. This was home territory not jurisdictionally, but emotionally. The stretch of road he'd driven hundreds of times, same curve near the oak tree. Same mailbox leaning slightly to the left, and the lights came on, red, blue, sharp enough to cut through the dark and flood the rearview mirror. Not fast, not frantic, just decisive. He didn't sigh, he didn't tense. He signaled immediately and pulled over cleanly, wheels straight, engine still running. Years of training compressed into a single smooth movement. The stop was lawful. He already knew that. In this city, officers could initiate a stop for a broken taillight, a wide turn-in, equipment check. He mentally ran through the list without anxiety. The patrol car stopped behind him, angled slightly outward, a textbook officer's safety position. He noticed that too. Silence, and the door opened. Heavy boots on asphalt. The sound carried more than it should have in the empty street. Evening, the deputy said through the open window, voice calm, neutral. Not friendly, professional. The officer leaned in just enough to look down at him, flashlight beam cutting across the interior. The light paused in his hands, then his face. License and registration. The words were flat. No greeting, no explanation. Yes, sir, the deputy replied. He reached slowly, deliberately. He taught recruits this exact movement. Announce, reach, pause. His wallet came out first, then he stopped. I want to let you know, he said evenly, eyes forward. I'm a sheriff's deputy. Badge is on my belt. Weapon is secured on my right side. The flashlight didn't move. For half a second, nothing happened. No acknowledgement. No change in posture. Just the faint buzz of the patrol car's engine behind them, then the officer straightened. Step out of the vehicle. The command came too fast. Too early. No procedural bridge. No escalation ladder. The deputy noticed that. The way you notice a missing stair just before your foot lands. Officer, he said, still calm. Before I do, can I ask the reason for the stop? The flashlight clicked off. That, more than anything, shifted the air. You're being detained, the officer replied. Step out of the vehicle. Now, the deputy complied. Door open, 1 foot down. Then the other, hands visible, always visible as he stood. The night felt colder. The street, suddenly larger, more exposed. The officer's hand hovered near his holster, not gripping it, not drawing, but close enough to send a message without words. A second patrol car arrived. Tires crunched softly against gravel as it pulled in behind the first. Back up without urgency. Back up without explanation. The deputy stood between his open door and the patrol car's headlights, light washing over him from behind, like a stage he hadn't asked to step onto. You said you're law enforcement, the first officer asked. Yes, sir. Where? County Sheriff's Office. A pause. Which county? He answered. The officer didn't react. Didn't nod. Didn't challenge it either. Just turned slightly, radio mic brushing against his shoulder. Dispatch, he said, voice suddenly precise. Run the driver. Possible impersonation. The word hit harder than any raised voice. Impersonation. The deputy felt something shift inside his chest. Not fear, not yet. Something colder. Something familiar. This wasn't confusion anymore. It was posture, it was pride. And as the radio crackled back to life, The quiet street no longer felt neutral. It felt like a line had been drawn, not on the road, but between who he was and who they had decided he couldn't be. Silence stretched. Then footsteps approached from behind him. More boots, more authority, and no one asking how this had gone wrong so quickly. The second cruiser settled in, behind the first with a quiet finality, headlights washing the scene white. Not urgency, not chaos, control. The kind that arrives already convinced it's necessary. The deputy felt the shift before anyone spoke, the way gravity changes when more uniforms enter the frame. The sergeant stepped out this time. Slower movements, older boots, the posture of someone used to being deferred to. He didn't approach immediately. He watched first, took in the spacing, the stance. The deputy standing bareheaded in the cold, hands relaxed but visible. Badge still clipped to his belt like an unanswered question. What we got? The sergeant asked. Traffic stop, the first officer replied. Driver claims he's law enforcement. Claims. The sergeant's eyes finally met the deputy's, not hostile. Evaluating. Like reading a report before deciding how much of it to believe. Evening, the sergeant said. Evening, sergeant, the deputy answered. He hadn't looked at the chevrons, didn't need to. The tone gave it away. I'm a deputy with the county sheriff's office. Badge and credentials are on me. Happy to provide them. The sergeant nodded once, then turned slightly away, already half committed to the narrative forming behind him. Let's see some ID. The deputy handed over his credentials carefully. The leather was worn at the edges. Years of use, the kind you don't get from a novelty shop. The sergeant opened it under the headlights, thumb tracing the seal, eyes scanning name, rank photo, deputy sheriff, active status, issued 3 years earlier. The sergeant held it a second longer than necessary. You live around here? He asked. Yes, sir, heading home. Yes, another pause. Dispatch crackled faintly in the background, running information that would confirm everything already printed in his hands. Procedurally, this was where things should have de-escalated. Law enforcement contact between agencies follows unspoken rules. Profession, courtesy, mutual recognition, respect for rank, regardless of uniform color. The academy teaches it. Policy manuals reference it without spelling it out. You don't challenge identity once it's verified unless you have cause. But cause here had already been replaced by something else. The sergeant closed the credentials and handed them back, not apologetically, not respectfully, neutrally, as if returning a receipt. Stand by, he said. The deputy blinked. Stand by for what, sergeant? The sergeant didn't answer immediately. He stepped aside, conferring quietly with the first officer. Their voices were low, but the body language was louder. Shoulders squared, faces set, no one leaning in to listen, only to assert. A third unit arrived. No lights, just presence. The deputy felt the weight of it now, not fear, calculation. He had been trained to recognize escalation, even when voices stayed calm. This wasn't about safety anymore. It was about authority being questioned simply by existing. Is there an issue with my credentials? The deputy asked, careful, measured. The sergeant turned back. We're still verifying. They're issued by the state. The deputy replied. You can confirm through post or interagency. The sergeant's jaw tightened just slightly. We'll handle it our way. There it was, rank without recognition. The badge on the deputy's belt didn't open doors here. It didn't soften tone. It didn't trigger the reflexive respect drilled into every officer from day one. Instead, it hovered uncomfortably, like a challenge that needed to be put back in its place. The deputy glanced down the street. Curtain still drawn. No witnesses. No accountability yet. Just uniforms and assumptions sharing the same cold air. Behind him, a radio chirped. Dispatch confirms, a voice said, filtered and distant. Subject is a sworn deputy, active. The words landed clean, clear, undeniable. And still, no one moved. The sergeant nodded once, slowly, as if receiving inconvenient information. All right, he said, we're not done yet. The deputy felt it then, the realization settling like lead. Verification hadn't changed the outcome. It had only changed the justification. And whatever came next wouldn't be about law at all. The air felt heavier, now, as if the street itself had decided to hold its breath. No one announced the next step. No one explained the delay. The deputy stood under the headlights, the white glare flattening his shadow against the pavement until he looked smaller than he was. The sergeant shifted his weight. The sound of his duty belt settling broke the silence. Turn around, he said. The words were calm, practiced, the kind of tone officers use when they've already decided the outcome. The deputy didn't move right away, not in defiance, in disbelief. Sergeant, he said carefully, am I being detained or arrested? The question wasn't rhetorical. It was procedural. The kind every officer is trained to answer without hesitation. You're being detained, the sergeant replied. For what reason? Another pause. Longer this time. Failure to comply, the sergeant said. The deputy exhaled slowly through his nose. He felt the line tighten, not around his wrists yet, but around the logic of the moment. "I have complied with every lawful order," he said. His voice stayed even, but something underneath it had hardened. "I identified myself. I provided credentials. Dispatch confirmed my status." The sergeant stepped closer. Close enough that the deputy could smell coffee on his breath. Close enough to lower his voice. "This doesn't need to turn into something," the sergeant said. The deputy met his eyes. "It already has." A hand touched the deputy's elbow. Not rough. Not gentle either. Just firm enough to communicate ownership. "Hands behind your back." The words landed with a dull finality. For a fraction of a second, training and instinct collided. Every use of force briefing he'd ever attended flashed through his mind. Escalation thresholds, compliance optics, the danger of sudden movements. He knew exactly how this would look on Bodycam. He knew how easily calm resistance could be rebranded as threat. Slowly, deliberately, he brought his hands back. Cold metal closed around his wrists. The click was soft, final. Somewhere behind him, a Bodycam beeped. A confirmation tone, barely audible, but unmistakable. Recording. Evidence. Future. The deputy stared straight ahead. He focused on the rhythm of his breathing, on keeping his shoulder relaxed, on not giving the night anything it could later weaponize. "This is unnecessary," he said quietly. No one answered. Instead, the sergeant reached for the deputy's belt. Fingers brushed the badge, then paused. "Remove it," he said. The deputy turned his head slightly. "That's my shield." "Not right now," the sergeant replied. The badge was unclipped, lifted away. The small metallic sound echoed louder than it should have. The deputy felt it like a hollowing, not symbolic, not poetic, physical. As if a part of his identity had been temporarily confiscated. Without the badge, the dynamic shifted instantly. The officer's posture changed. Shoulders eased. Hands drifted farther from holsters. The perceived threat was gone. The irony wasn't lost on him. The badge hadn't de-escalated the situation. It had escalated it. "You're going to sit on the curb," the sergeant said. The deputy complied. Knees bent. Asphalt cold through the fabric of his pants. He looked down at his hands, cuffed, familiar from countless arrests he'd made himself. Across the street, a porch light flicked on. Someone was watching now. The sergeant spoke into his radio, voice steady. "Subject detained. Secure. Will advise." Subject not deputy, not colleague. Subject, the deputy swallowed. In that moment, he understood something with painful clarity. The badge only protects you when it's recognized. When it isn't, it becomes evidence against you, a challenge, a threat, and the longer he sat there, stripped of rank and name, the clearer it became that this stop was no longer about control. It was about precedent. Morning didn't arrive gently. It never does after nights like that. It came with fluorescent lights and the stale smell of burnt coffee, with plastic chairs bolted to the floor, and a wall clock that ticked too loudly for a room built to pretend it was neutral. The deputy sat alone, hands free now, wrists marked faintly where the cuffs had been. He rolled his shoulders once, feeling the aches settle in, not pain, just residue. The kind that stays after something has passed but not resolved. Across from him, a monitor flickered to life. The footage began without ceremony. Bodycam video never feels cinematic when you're inside it. No dramatic score, no emphasis, just wide-angle distortion and sound that catches too much, fabric shifting, breath, the click of a safety strap. The street looked flatter on screen than it had felt in real life. Smaller, less dangerous. That, too, mattered. The timestamp glowed in the corner, 01742. There he was, stepping out of the car, hands visible, movement slow, cooperative. The audio picked up his voice clearly. "I want to let you know I'm a sheriff's deputy." The room stayed quiet. An internal affairs lieutenant leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. Years in the job had taught him what to watch for. Not just actions, but pauses. Half seconds where decisions are made before they're spoken. On screen, the flashlight clicked off. "Step out of the vehicle." The lieutenant exhaled through his nose. Not a sigh. Something more controlled. They watched it all. The arrival of backup. The credentials held under headlights. Dispatch confirming status. The word impersonation crackling over the radio like a match. Struck too close to gasoline. Every few minutes, the video was paused. "Right there," the lieutenant said once. "Rewind 10 seconds." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room understood the weight of rewind. It meant scrutiny. It meant language would be pulled apart and put back together under policy manuals and case law. Why detention after confirmation? The lieutenant asked no one in particular. No one answered. In departments like this, accountability doesn't arrive with shouting. It arrives with silence, and documentation, with phrases like articulable suspicion and objective reasonableness, with policies that officers swear to know and often assume won't be read this closely. The video played on. The moment the badge was removed landed definitely on screen, without the cold, without the pressure of bodies nearby. It looked worse. Unnecessary. Symbolic. A deviation from standard procedure that no training bulletin could justify cleanly. The deputy watched himself sit on the curb, watched the way his shoulders lowered, not in defeat, but calculation. He remembered what he'd been thinking then. Not about freedom, but about optics, about how restraint sometimes becomes the only form of resistance left. The lieutenant stopped the footage again. "This goes public," he said quietly, "and it doesn't just follow the arresting officers." No one disagreed. In the hours that followed, the video moved, uploaded, duplicated, logged. From an internal server to a legal drive. From a union rep's tablet to a city attorney's inbox. Each transfer stripped it further of context and added weight all the same. By the time the sun climbed high enough to bleach the street outside, the incident no longer belonged to the night. Or to the officers who'd made the decisions. It belonged to the record now, and records have a way of speaking louder than anyone expects. Authority rarely collapses in public. It erodes quietly, behind closed doors. Inside emails never meant to be forwarded during meetings where no one raises their voice, but everyone understands what's at stake. By the time the deputy returned home, the street looked unchanged. Same mailbox, same oak tree, but the familiarity felt thin now, like a set rebuilt after a fire. He sat in his car longer than usual, engine off, hands resting on the wheel, replaying moments he couldn't pause or rewind. The click of the cuffs, the absence of apology, the way verification hadn't meant relief, only delay. Inside the department, the machinery had already started moving. Administrative leave was issued first, not as punishment, officially, but as protocol. Language mattered. It always did. Paid leave pending review. Neutral words meant to calm, not to heal. For the deputy, it felt like being benched for surviving something he hadn't caused. The arresting officers remained on duty. That, too, followed procedure. Internal affairs interviews began within 72 hours, as policy required. Questions were structured, controlled, each one designed less to assign, blame than to test consistency. Authority doesn't ask why first, it asks who can support their version longest. The deputy answered carefully. He spoke the way he had been trained to speak when giving testimony. Factual, restrained, free of speculation. He resisted the urge to describe how it felt. Feelings, he knew, were easy to dismiss. Instead, he described actions, commands given, commands followed. The moment his credentials were verified, the moment detention continued anyway. Across the table, investigators nodded. Pens moved. No reactions betrayed conclusions. Outside the building, the footage leaked. Not dramatically, not with warning, just a quiet upload late one evening. First shared in a private forum, then clipped, then stripped, of timestamps, and reposted with captions that asked questions instead of making claims. By morning, the questions had multiplied. Why detain a verified deputy? Why remove the badge? Why escalate after confirmation? The department released a statement before noon. We are aware of the incident. We take these matters seriously. A review is ongoing. Carefully constructed sentences, passive, polished. Authority speaking in its safest voice. Public reaction didn't explode, it pressed. Slowly, relentlessly. Civil rights attorneys weighed in, not emotionally, but procedurally. Former officers commented on deviations from standard interagency protocol. Training supervisors referenced post guidelines that emphasized de-escalation, especially during law enforcement contacts. The story refused to stay simple. That was the real cost. The sergeant was called in for reassignment. Temporary officially. The arresting officer was removed from patrol pending retraining, not termination, not yet. Authority rarely amputates quickly. It probes first, measuring how much damage it can absorb without losing function. The deputy returned to duty 3 weeks later. Same uniform, same badge, different weight. Colleagues greeted him carefully, some with quiet solidarity, others with distance that felt rehearsed. No one said the wrong thing, but no one said the right thing either. Institutions don't process trauma well when it challenges their self-image. In a mandatory briefing room weeks later, a revised training memo was distributed. It referenced the incident without naming it. Language about interagency encounters was added. A paragraph on implicit bias was expanded. Supervisors were instructed to emphasize verification as resolution, not escalation. On paper, it looked like reform. In practice, it felt like cost containment. The deputy read the memo twice. He recognized his night in the margins, rewritten, sanitized, transformed into a lesson without a victim. Justice, he realized, rarely feels like vindication. It feels like compromise. The officers involved were not fired. They were not celebrated either. One transferred departments within the year. Another remained, quieter now, reputation altered but career intact. Authority survived. It always does. What didn't survive was certainty. The deputy still stops cars, still wears the badge, still believes in the law, but without illusion. He understands now that authority isn't a shield. It's a mirror. It reflects exactly how much power others are willing to acknowledge in you, and no more. On quiet nights, when red and blue lights flash in his own rearview mirror during a stop he initiates, he's aware of his voice in a new way. How calm can sound like control. How commands can feel like traps. How easily procedure can become pride if left unchecked. The system moved on. But something remained altered, because authority always costs something. Sometimes careers. Sometimes credibility. Sometimes trust that can't be retrained back into place. And sometimes the cost is knowing with absolute clarity that justice isn't loud, it's just heavy.